Hey everyone, Wyatt Claypool here. Ever since we had the British Columbia provincial election and the New Brunswick provincial election go by, I think there's been a lot more discussion around polling accuracy, and how polling even works, especially in Canada, where the field is far smaller than what is down in the United States. And I think the best person to bring on today to talk about this issue is Quito Maggi, who is the founder and president of Mainstreet Research, who I think has done a fantastic job polling in these last two provincial elections and looks like might get it right again in Saskatchewan. But I do tons of videos on polling, Kudo. I talk about it all the time, and I still get people skeptical about polling. Like, is it rigged? Are people just putting out numbers? Do they even know who they're contacting?
Yeah.
And I think you would agree with me. There's polling firms that you maybe wouldn't look at too much, but compared to the US, I find Canadian firms polling in Canada tend to get it right, and especially you guys who in these past two provincial elections got it really on side.
Yeah, that's right. I think, look, both the Americans also have an association that does have very strict guidelines. It's called the APOR, the American Association of Public Opinion Research. Here in Canada, we have the Canadian Research Insights Council, of which we're a member. And so typically the member firms that are part of CRIC have to sign on to a certain standards of polling accuracy, following specific best practices, and then sort of also goes along with sort of communication practices in terms of saying never say anything that that your poll doesn't actually say, or that it goes too far for what your poll says. Some people say, oh, this is a guaranteed majority or whatever the case may be. As you probably know, in the BC election, we published 14 riding polls. I always caveat those a lot and say, look, small sample size, greater chances of error. I think of the 14, 12 ended up pretty close. Two did very badly. It's the nature of riding polls, smaller frame. So, we do our best to sort of warn people that, it's a snapshot and it can be, it can have sources of error.
And especially in a province like British Columbia, where the leaders of the parties are different, the parties are different, there's tons of independents running all over the place right now, and it might change with recounts and the mail-in ballots and provisional ballots that are coming in that still need to be counted. You guys currently are literally right on the numbers. 46 NDP, 45 Conservative, and 2 Greens. And if it goes a little bit off from that, that's not an actual error. That's just the missability. I have people, when I've been talking about, because I'm a more of a conservative person, obviously, saying I think there's a 75% shot the conservatives are going to win. I'll still have people come back later and say, hey, you said that they were going to win. I'm like, what? There's always, you have to show up and vote, by the way, people.
Yeah.
And the only big miss that there was in British Columbia, and it's not on anyone for missing it, was the conservative appeal inside of Surrey. But that's not something you can pull, because I've talked about and showed some of the crosstabs to show what I'm talking about when I say that it's impossible to really pull Surrey and it's just basically a giant question mark. You guys get different rates of people answering your polls, where basically polling is very white. The people who answer polls are pretty much across the
Yeah.
board very white. And you guys, in most of your polls in the South Asian community, sometimes could only get 10 people to answer the poll,
Yeah.
maybe 35, I think, on the bigger days.
And that's why, if you followed along, Wyatt, that you probably know this, that towards the end, and this isn't the first time we've done this in a daily tracker, is we'll publish what we call a roll-up. It's a roll-up of all the samples from the beginning. So towards the end, on that last day, we were reporting 11,000 and change sample sizes to be able to look. So yes, it's for the general public information as well, for the modelers specifically, and for ourselves internally to look at and say, okay, here's the vote among the South Asian community. On any given night, you're correct. The sample is way too small. But when we look at that roll up, we could tell that the South Asian community, started behind and took a lead. When we look at the East Asian, the Chinese communities in BC, we knew that it was an overwhelming support for the Conservatives. And so that's why we could say comfortably that those riding polls that we did in Richmond Center, Richmond Steveston, were more likely to be correct because of the population of Chinese in Richmond.
Even in Richmond Stevenson, the only reason the NDP effectively won that riding was because Jackie Lee was running as an independent on the basis that I am the more conservative option than the current conservative candidate, and that siphoned away enough of the votes. But you can't actually poll independents often. It's like back in Ontario in 2022, nobody was going to be able to poll that, what's her name, one Halderman, Norfolk, the provincial version. Why am I forgetting her name? But there's an independent there who won, but there's no poll, there's no model that's ever going to tell you that an independent's going to be able to win. Bobby Ann Brady, there you go.
And I think that's why, the models are going to be better in, the models were better in New Brunswick. The models will be better on Monday night in Saskatchewan, because it's a very established parties, established guidelines. You had the surge of the Conservative Party that it's very hard to model that. And you had a riding redistribution all at the same time. Those both prevent for, I'm not the modeler, Robert from my team is, but I knew that he was having those types of challenges, and so did other modelers. I still think I'm going to wait until Monday night to see what exactly happens with those last 65,000 ballots. A lot of people are sort of analyzing, and it's like, no, let's wait till Friday, which it is today. By the end of the day, according to Elections Canada, they've written me specifically saying they're going to have the riding by riding number of ballots, and then we'll kind of be able to know, can some of these seats flip? Can the total vote share flip? That one's unlikely. It's with 65,000 ballots and a 21,000 vote win. But can a couple of seats flip? I think they can, yeah.
Especially Malahat is not even really an NDP riding right now. It's basically just slightly over. It's just slightly on the side of the NDP. It's like by 20 votes. It's effectively a tie. So yeah, it is very realistic for the ridings to flip at the moment. And two, the thing is, even if a bunch of these flip Conservative and you guys had called the race 46 NDP, 45 Conservative, that's a margin of error. And that could be, there's tons of explanations for why a poll is never going to get it precisely right. And response bias is a big deal. And you guys have to correct a lot for response bias. I was really happy to see this, because other polls, sometimes they just put out the numbers and it's just whatever the numbers were. And you guys will take, especially university educated voters, and usually weight them down, because you know that somebody who has a degree in sociology, who's an engineer, somebody who took a master's degree, they're far more likely to pick up the phone and say, oh, they want my opinion? I'm going to give them my opinion, rather than some guy who just got home as an electrician. He doesn't want to take a poll, even though IVR polls are actually pretty fast.
Yeah, and we've been polling for education in most provincial and national polls now for the last, I'd say, since about 2018, just because, again, the response rates are down, but also the type of people who answer are down. So you're having to make these adjustments. No different in the United States as well, that we've been doing polling there for the last year and a half. It's the same kind of adjustments that we have to make.
Yeah, and that's the thing that you see a lot in the U.S. in the last few elections, where oftentimes pollsters are completely off the results. And what I tell people is, very often, nobody's trying to confuse anyone or trick anybody by saying this guy's up 10 points and then he ends up losing. Oftentimes, it's because the people taking the polls don't want to take the polls, or they don't take them in the same rates. So what you hear a lot of, and you guys have been doing some U.S. polling, is that in the past two election cycles for president, they say that there's always a hidden Trump voter, somebody who is definitely showing up for Donald Trump, but a pollster has a very difficult time being able to find that person when they pick up the phone. So you'll even have, and I follow the show of, I'm not sure if you know Richard Barris, the People's Pundit. He's kind of like Janet Brown for the U.S., where he tries to balance education, like work type and whatnot, so that he doesn't end up having crazy poll results in Georgia, in a county like Coffee County, where it looks like it's going Democrat, but it's because you accidentally polled a bunch of school teachers, and obviously they're more likely to vote for the Democratic candidate.
Yeah, and there's lots of examples of that. Even we learned a lot in this BC election about balancing between true rural and sort of semi-urban rural within interior BC, and we're applying that to the Saskatchewan polls that we know. So balancing between cities, towns, and truly rural populations within these rural areas. And so it's most of our error in BC came all from the interior. We overestimated the BC Conservatives in the interior, and I'm actually expecting to see tonight that a lot of these ballots that are out there, the late ballots that came in, the ones that were already counted, I don't know where they're from. We'll find out eventually, but the ones that arrived late, to me, it makes logical sense that they came from places that were further away, right?
And that's where
Kelowna, Interior, North Island, etc. That's why they arrived at elections BC late, is because they were further away, and so I expect some of that is going to balance out in the poll. Some of that error outside of outside of Lower Mainland and Island.
because not a lot of people are going to be sending in a mail-in vote in Vancouver, Quilchena, or Vancouver Yaletown. There's no point in really mailing in a vote in Yaletown. You can take the elevator down to the first floor of your building, and that's probably where the polling place is, because there's not many places to really set one up in an area where it's only like 5 square blocks or whatever in Yaletown there.
Exactly.
So that's where the Conservatives can feel decently optimistic in some of these ridings, because in Burke Mountain, Coquitlam, you're probably going to have not only disproportionately a lot of mail-in ballots for that riding, but a lot of them coming from the Burke Mountain area where, yes, they were postmarked on the 19th, but they got to a Canada Post distribution center, and then it took a few more days for them to actually get to BC elections, so then Correct. They could send them to the right area to be counted. So
that is my assumption.
Yeah, and I think it's a good assumption, because you do see people where they see 49,000 ballots left to count, and then a few days later, it's 65,000. It's like, it's just things don't work as smoothly as people think, especially if people have sent in some mail-in ballots from Haida Gwaii. Those are not going to be getting to BC elections so that they know they have them on hand. And it's not like Canada Post is going to get on the phone and say, just letting you know, you got another 300 mail-in ballots from Haida Gwaii. That's not how Canada Post is set up to give BC elections their data. And this is another thing, actually, because I want to talk about Alberta a little bit, and also Saskatchewan, because they're two very similar provinces, but Saskatchewan, in a certain sense, is even more obviously has a bigger urban rural divide. Is that people will look at a poll, especially out of Saskatchewan, and they'll see in your latest polls, oh, Saskatchewan NDP is up on the Saskatchewan party, and it's like, okay, but that doesn't actually mean that they're winning. That means that they could be doing really well in Regina and Saskatoon, but in the rural areas, that's where it's actually going to be very difficult to flip voters, because Correct. It's not like people are uniformly going to be going towards that party. Especially, a lot of parties end up overplaying their hand to a specific community, doing really well, and then hurting themselves elsewhere. 2023 in Alberta, I kept telling people, and I said this actually during the 22 leadership race for Danielle Smith, you have to understand the culture of Calgary, and it's not rural Alberta. And so you actually, and this is where I see now, people will see a poll come up for Alberta and say, Alberta UCP is up 5% on the NDP. And I'm like, that's bad, because the Alberta and UCP barely won on seats with an 8.6% margin of victory on the popular vote. And that's the same thing with the NDP, but in reverse, where they're like, we're up by 5 points in the poll. But do you guys have the ability to dig into these rural ridings? That's the big issue. It's a farmer's province.
Yeah, and I guess that was the challenge in Alberta, and we if you look at our say last 10 provincial polls going back to, we usually get the urban centers correct, and then where we miss is outside of those, and that can make a significant impact on the vote intents. What it doesn't make an impact on is seat counts. That's why I said to everybody, I don't even get the different polls that were out in BC that had these crazy different. Some people had the NDP up in outside of mainland and the island, and I said it doesn't really matter if you model that one versus our poll that had a 20-point lead. It flips 2 seats, whereas a 1-point flip in in census Metro Vancouver flips a dozen seats. So it's really much more important about getting it right, and that's why I was proud of the number that we got in Calgary in the last Alberta election. I was famously called out for saying I thought the NDP was going to pull it out. In the end, it came within 1,000 votes. It was super close, and our vote share, again, the only error we had was from outside Calgary and Edmonton.
Yeah, and no one can ever be blamed for getting it wrong when it's literally 1,200 votes across multiple ridings where people are losing and winning by 7 votes and 50 votes and whatnot. And we even have that right now in Surrey, with people leading with 107 votes, 96 votes, or Juan de Fuca Malahat 20 votes. That's not really a margin that you can really count on. And in BC too, really, I think what it came down to as well is that the money difference does matter. Your get out the vote campaign really does matter, because I think that's the only reason that we see the BC NDP leading a little bit when it comes to the popular vote. Is I was involved in the BC Conservative campaign, and this isn't like a secret I'm revealing. The riding campaigns were done with $5 and a ham sandwich in some cases, even if it was a winning riding, because you don't have the experienced people. You don't have people who can go around chasing ballots in terms of finding people who haven't voted, figuring out a way to get them to vote. And so that it really became a big infrastructure race. And I think it will be way easier to model, even though you were pretty dead on for this one. Obviously, the ridings are not always going to be the same. Of the ones that you predict might go blue, they might go NDP, and then the NDP ones might go conservative. It's just a crazy election. But even with the equal money between the two parties next time, with an actual baseline to base the party's performance off of, it will make everything way better. Because the BC Liberals were obviously more of a urban riding or an urban party, and then they would drop some of the more blue-collar rural areas to the NDP. And it seems like it's kind of inverted, where now it's almost like Alberta, where the BC NDP are very much an urban party, that urban-suburban party, and then the Conservatives are the suburban-rural party.
Yeah, we often talk about that organizational advantage and who's going to overperform the polls. Consistently, like in Ontario, the PCs overperform the polls. In a handful of in a handful of provinces, the NDP outperform the polls. Nationally, the Liberal Party of Canada traditionally has overperformed the polls until this, really until late 2023, early 2024, where they've had that operational advantage. I think that's why I'd expect to see the SAS party actually do better on Monday than what the polls are saying, because it's the advantage of incumbency. There's generally a general desire out there for change, and I think it's right across North America, right across the Western world. But to think that Scott Moe and the SAS party could lose, to me, it's somebody said to me, "Oh, wouldn't it be?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, I've seen this before. I've seen it be close before, and it's just not going to happen."
It's just practically speaking, the NDP's pitch is programs. A lot of NDP pitches provincially is always, we are the big programs party. We're the ones who are going to have the bigger social safety net. We're going to expand the public service, whatnot. And the problem is that has a specific appeal that can work out well in Regina and Saskatoon and some of the other smaller cities in Saskatchewan. But then when you go out and it's just pure farmers, it's like, I don't know who that's then appealing to. And this happens all the time, where somebody is chasing a voting bloc that doesn't actually carry them over the finish line when it comes to the full election, that you actually eventually need to go and find a way of figuring out which riding actually has flippable voters that's on the other side, rather than just winning what you're already winning even harder. And that's actually what was my criticism of the UCP's campaign in 2023, is a lot of the pitches made populists like them more, but not what I categorize as the nervous middle class voter who isn't like moderate, like they want super moderate, mild policies, but they want you to talk about like taxes, and they want you to talk about economic health. They don't care about, like, for example, the Alberta Bill of Rights type stuff.
Yeah, or what are they called? The streaks in the sky, or chemtrails
or whatever.
Yeah, the chemtrails. It's like, It's not a vote getter.
Here's actually a great example of the US. People don't realize how much on people watching politics online skews things badly on the ground. People don't actually know that the average voter doesn't care about online discourse. Tulsi Gabbard, for some reason, is now a big darling of like the right in the US, even though she's actually not that conservative on many, many issues. But everyone acts like this is a big get. I'm like, she got destroyed in the Democratic 2020 primary because nobody cares about foreign policy. And when you become the foreign policy candidate, you're never going to pull more than like 1 or 2% because the average voter doesn't care about the things that people online care about. And that's the problem I see that certain conservatives or like the PPC or the Green Party tends to fall into. They think that the hot button online issues are the issues that are going to cause somebody who just drove their kids to soccer practice, going gets Starbucks and like shops at Safeway and just watches like entertainment Netflix shows. They don't care about your like really oddly specific foreign policy issues or populist type issues. And this goes for the left and the right, the NDP, the conservatives, the liberals. They all have these terminally online issues that end up making them completely miss the average voter. And I think that that's why polling actually does matter. I also encourage people, I'll throw a link in the description of this video below for anyone who wants to sign up to get the detailed breakdowns of Mainstreet Research polls, because I think it's really good. And it makes you better at analyzing politics to actually know what average people think of issues. You guys don't really do issue polling, but just knowing which demographics are.
We do. I mean, we do a lot of early issue polling. We don't do a lot of that publicly. We do a lot of it for, our clients. We have a lot of issue clients that we ask questions for as part of our omnibus questions, and then, some of that informs the polling. I mean, this election, all these elections across Canada, the last three, at least potentially four, have all been about the same thing, right? It's all about affordability. It's all about healthcare. It's all about public safety. And the sentiment underneath, the feelings are always the same, which is, it's a time for change. It started in spring of 2023, and you can see it right across the Western world, including North and South America. And we just don't know when it's going to end. I think, if Scott Moe hangs on Monday but loses substantially, he'll be lucky. I think David Eby got lucky. I don't think Justin Trudeau has a snowball chance in hell. And then, it comes down to, who do you believe is the change candidate in the U.S.? Is it Kamala Harris, because she was the change candidate when she first jumped on, or is it Donald Trump? And I actually think whoever sort of successfully sells himself as the incumbent, as the non-incumbent and the change maker, that's who's going to win. Right now, I'd give the advantage to Trump.
Yeah, fair enough. And so another thing, actually, I think you just touched on there that people need to know just about the polling industry is that it's not like people think like, oh, this poll has the Liberals doing a little bit better. Not these days, obviously, but the Liberals are doing better in this poll, or the NDP is doing better in this poll. They must be paid by that party. You just hinted at it right there. Most polling is done for free to prove that you're good at polling. The whole point is that it's a very easy thing that actually gets checked, because there's an election that proves whether or not that you were good at it or not. So you can do market research later for other people, and they know that you're not just.
And, that's why we do it with, we've done these daily trackers and subscriptions, and, and the subscriptions keep us going. Let us do that work that is for free. Otherwise, the volume goes way down. We've been doing it pretty successfully in the United States as well, as a subscriber model, that informs the public, because otherwise you end up having two classes of people. You have the politically informed people who can afford real quality polls, and then you have everybody else. Look, I get along okay with some of the aggregators, PJ Fournier and Grenier and stuff, but the prevalence of those folks in the media has actually caused less understanding of polling, not more, I believe, because And some of the ways they report things, I'm not a big fan of the whole +1, +2. Here in Canada, especially, there was a lot of comments on social media saying, "Oh, you guys were the worst off. You had the Conservatives leading +3, and the NDP won." Not understanding sort of like how math works. I get annoyed at it because um, it's their fault.
They didn't realize that when other firms said +5 NDP or +4 NDP, they were also predicting like a C white vote too, because their regionals were off. People need to look at the regionals, and
Correct.
there is an idea that polling is one of those things that you kind of feel too. That when you look at a poll, I can kind of feel that this stands to reason, that this makes sense. That if I see an Alberta poll pop up, like happened a lot during the provincial election, and somehow the rural areas, Lethbridge, Red Deer areas are tight, they're not tight. It's just not how it works. If you go around talking to enough people, you can kind of get the mood, and you can see which polls are working well and which ones are not. And that's another thing. I don't like poll aggregators for the most part. I'll still use them somewhat. The problem is that you can't mix bad polls with good polls and pretend that you're now going to get a good result simply because we've added more polls together. Again, there were Alberta pollsters who missed the popular vote in that election by 14.5% or 13.5%. And it's like and usually it's a strategy firm that does that, because strategy firms are in the business of working for a party usually and giving advice.
The analogy that I always use, Wyatt, in that is that, you can't take two darts, shoot it at a dartboard, miss 3 feet to the left on the wall with one dart, and 3 feet to the right of the dartboard with the second dart, and call it a bullseye. You just can't.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think a good what was I trying to get to here? It was on. Oh yeah, this is the one more question I have for you before I'll let you go and off and to take your flight. Hopefully we're not holding up your plane here, or I at least know we're not. But what do you think was?
They're starting to call boarding now, so
Yeah,
I have 2 minutes.
what do you think was the big difference, or is the big difference, in terms of the accuracy and quality between online polls and IVR? Because you guys are famously one of the few IVR pollsters, and you use what you call smart IVR, but most people just use online panels these days. What do you find is the reason that you don't use online and other people do?
So there's been really, really good online pollsters. Not all online polls are the same. I would say. I would ask. I would say, I have a great deal of respect for Leger and a few others that I know do probability recruited panels, and I think that's one of the things that people need to keep an eye on. Where it's like, how was this panel recruited? If it's just because there's been a few studies about them being hacked by AI and bots and other things. So I think probability recruiting for online panels, and we do use some of those in the U.S. In a blend with IVR. But traditionally, I like to stick to 100% probability sampling because, well, usually nothing's ever happened like this election in BC, where we saw all the polls, the different types of polls kind of converge very late. Usually it's as we get 1 or 2 weeks out from an election, there might be difference early on in the election or pre-election, but you usually see convergence. And it's more has to do with informed vote that's paying attention, and informed vote versus vote that isn't paying attention, and then it converges by the end. And
Ooh, did we lose him? If we lost Kudo, then this might be the end of the episode right here, but we'll have to have him back. Well, okay, we almost lost you. Oh, there. Ooh, okay, we did lose him right there. Well, that was our interview with Quito Maggi. I think he's a really good guest to have on to just talk about polling, the differences in how a lot of this polling is done. I think it's good to demystify it, know who the pollsters are, know that they're like, honest people, honest best, and they actually did pull out pretty good results when it came to the BC provincial election there. I will see if Kudo can come back. If not, then believe that this will probably be the end of the episode here. I caught him in the airport, so he was like going to Miami or something like that, and he was willing to take like an interview on his phone. So that was good to see. But anyways, maybe what I'll do is I'll pause it here, and if he doesn't come back, then I'll bring him back in just a quick second, or I'll just come back on and say, hey, that's the end of the episode for realsies this time. Okay, it appears that that was the end of the interview. Thank you for watching this video, even though it was a little bit shaky at the end there. I hope you learned something, feel more informed about how polls work, and I'd probably love to have Quito on in the future, especially in the middle of an election campaign, one that I'm not working on, because that would have looked really bad if Quito came on to talk about polling and I'm just like trashing the NDP in my videos or whatever. That's why I specifically wanted to do this after the election campaign was over, because I think that's a more fair way of doing stuff. But if you want to support the show, you guys can donate to the Give, Send, Go link in the description below or pinned at the top of the comments underneath. And also, if you want to sign up on my website, if you ever want recommendations for nomination race candidates in your riding, sign up at WyattClaypool.com. It's also in the description below. And what it allows me to do is if I know there's a really good nomination candidate for a conservative party in your area, I can basically email anyone in those postal codes and let you know that these people are actually solid, or give you like a ranking of how I would vote in that race. Or maybe I can even make small videos for those races and then put them out privately to those who live in the areas. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. Have a good one. And in the description below, before I just want to re-mention it, I will be having the link for the for Mainstreet Research's website if you guys ever want to sign up so you get their detailed polling readouts. I think they're very interesting. If you're really into politics, I think it would be worth your while. See you guys later.